Bitch by Jason Bradford. Chapter 7. A Creature to Scare a Werewolf. Present day. The text message Jack had received the night they were at the Majestic Theater plagued his mind. He hadn't talked to Phil in many years, not even regarding the health of their grandmother. Phil had become a recluse after Leah's death when they were teenagers, and his personality towards his family only grew more distant from there. Jack stared at the missed call. There was no voicemail. That also was strange. Why would his brother call after all this time, only one time, and not leave a voicemail or follow-up text message? It was strange. The house was silent. Karen slumbered upstairs while Jack sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the electronic glow from his cell phone. One missed call from Phil. Jack hovered his finger over Phil's contact information. All he had to do was land it on the screen, less than a quarter of an inch from his fingertip, and the call would be returned. He pondered. The odds of Phil answering at this time of the morning 2 time zones behind was slim, Jack assumed. If he called now, he could leave a message to confirm that the communication was returned. Fine, do it, Jack decided. His fingertip found the surface of the screen, and the calling icon appeared. To Jack's surprise, Phil answered his call before the third ring occurred. "Jack!" Phil answered. No hello, no how are you, how's Grandma, nothing of the sort, just Jack. Jack felt a sudden, unexpected rise of anger. "What do you want, Phil?" "I know you're mad," Phil said from over 1,000 miles away. "You have a right to be, and I understand that. But I have something troubling, and I don't know how to deal with it." "You have a problem," Jack stammered, "and you think I care enough to help you through it after not hearing from you in how long?" "I'm sorry, Jack," Phil offered. "I regret losing touch with everyone. I hope to explain it, so someday you'll accept my apology for everything I had to go through. But right now, I need your help." "And why am I obligated?" Jack asked. "Because," Phil contemplated with the pause, "you're my brother. And I hope we still care enough about each other to help. I regret not realizing that sooner." "What do you want?" Jack asked curtly. Silence from Phil's end of the conversation caused Jack to think that perhaps there had been a disconnect. "Are you there, Phil?" Jack asked. The silence was replaced by Phil's voice. "I got a letter today." "A letter?" "Not just a letter, a warning, written on white paper in red ink." "What kind of warning?" Jack's curiosity piqued. 2 words written upon a small card in a white envelope. It said, "Save Leah." Now it was Jack who returned the silence to his brother. "I left my room for just a moment," Phil continued. "When I came back, the envelope was sitting on my nightstand. I swear it wasn't there before I left." Jack waited with more silence as his response. "The creepy part is," Phil went on, "I was home alone." The brothers talked for just a few more moments, with Phil's promise to visit soon being offered before the conclusion of the call. It would be a few more weeks at least, if not longer, as Phil had business that he had to commit to before his visit. That business was not something Phil wished to discuss on the phone, and promised he'd come clean on everything when he was able to make it to his long overdue visit. Karen entered the living room, where Jack was sitting in silence. He sat on a leather couch with his hands supporting his head, which he had buried in them. His elbows rest just above his knees. She stood and towered over the man in deep thought. His eyes found her feet with their large, thick, sharp nails. He looked up at her. He could see the curiosity in her expression. "I spoke with my brother Phil this morning," he offered. "He received a strange letter suggesting that our dead sister isn't really dead. Someone broke into his apartment somehow and left it for him, then left without a sound." Karen swished her tail once and placed her ears back on her head to show she was listening. "He'll come visit soon after he gets some affairs in order," Jack went on. "He has things to inform us that will clear the air as to why he's been gone from our lives." Jack made eye contact with Karen's emerald eyes. "I don't know that I'll be able to forgive him." Karen put her large paw on his head as an offer of comfort. A knock at the door broke the moment of peace between the two. The sun had only been up for such a short time. Who could be knocking this early, Jack wondered. He got up from the couch and opened the door, with Karen standing behind him. "Hello, Mr. Naughton!" A plump young man with soft reddish-brown hair standing in the doorway shouted in excitement. He was holding a microphone, and a second man was behind him, holding a camera and boom. "I'm Maverick North with CSHB News, and we've come to ask some questions about the werewolf that was seen in town." The excited clicks of cameras could be heard as photos were taken of Karen standing behind Jack. Tyler was dead, and his escape was in the garage. Ginger was dead and in the swamp, now a missing person. Phil had a mysterious threat. Now was not a good time, but he knew if he closed the door, they would pursue him relentlessly and follow him everywhere. Would that be worse than offering him a few moments to answer questions? Perhaps that would satisfy the itch of the Karen craze for now, and they would be left in peace. Jack concluded that being friendly today would be the best way to be able to get rid of his mutilated friend's vehicle tonight without being seen. Jack stepped outside, with Karen behind him, and Maverick, along with his media team, was excited. The camera clicks rapidly increased. The interviews and photos moved quickly. Maverick and the CSHB News team were the only media there this time. Several townsfolk were there through it all, like Beatles fans crying and fainting. It was odd to witness, and Karen seemed touched by it. She was poised and, the best way Jack could describe it, well-behaved. After the reporter and his team left, the Karen craze that lingered seemed better equipped to deal with being in the presence of an apparent celebrity werewolf. There was still a lot to do. He had a meeting with Principal Ritchie to discuss a short-term personal leave, and to say goodbye to his students and promise them in person that he would be returning as soon as he possibly could. In the worst-case scenario, he'd be back with all of them before the fourth-grade promotions that they were all looking forward to. Principal Ritchie's office was bright with natural light as his blinds were pulled completely open, letting the day flood the small space. Heat could be felt from the sun as it lingered. Karen stood there in the corner of the room, as the small chairs would not support her frame or weight. Principal Ritchie looked up at her from his desk. Awe was his expression. "Astounding," he said. "Simply incredible. Werewolves were around when I was a young boy, even during my early 20s, but I never got to see one. It's a thrill to meet you, Miss Karen." Principal Ritchie was a man in his early 50s, a black man who preferred Oxford shirts and ties with the top button left undone and the tie hanging loosely from his collar. His sleeves were rolled up and his hands were large but proportionate to his fingers and the rest of him. His build was tall and lean, and he carried himself with grace and poise. There was very little gray in his hair that he wore short. His goatee also showed very little signs of his age when it came to gray hair. "I appreciate your understanding," Jack told Ritchie, "and I'm grateful that you have granted my leave." "You're one of my best," Ritchie replied. "The kids love you. I'd never do anything to jeopardize your employment here." Jack smiled a bit awkwardly. He never took praise without humility. "Once we get you and Mr. Sarah back in your classrooms," Ritchie continued, "the kids will be really happy to have everything back to normal." Jack hadn't expected Principal Ritchie to bring up Tyler. He could feel the time ticking against him. Each second banging him in the ass reminded him it was there, ticking down. He found a fake smile that he was sure looked convincing. "Exactly," was all he could find to say. "Have you heard from Mr. Sarah?" Principal Ritchie asked. Karen remained calm. There was no change in her demeanor. "No, I haven't," Jack answered. Before Jack knew it, Principal Ritchie was leading him and Karen down the hall to his classroom, where a substitute was temporarily stepping in for Jack. When he walked in, all the children, his kids, shouted out hello. The excitement was contagious, and Jack felt better than he had in a very long time. He didn't think he could feel any better. Ritchie introduced Karen next, and she ducked down and entered the room. All the cheering kids fell silent. Gasps and nervous whispering replaced the cheering and celebration that had just happened. The kids didn't know what to think of Karen's terrifying appearance. All the children recoiled, except for one, Courtney. Courtney ran to the front of the class and threw her arms around Karen. "Karen!" Courtney yelled. "Hi again!" Karen dropped to her knees so she wasn't much larger than the child, and she swallowed Courtney in her large, monstrous arms. Watching the two embrace proved to Jack that he could feel better than he had in a very long time, and he was feeling it now, watching two of his favorite girls hug. He smiled. "I saw you on the news this morning," 9-year-old Courtney said, looking up at Karen. "You looked beautiful." Seeing the interaction between their classmate and the blonde-haired werewolf, all the kids rushed up to touch, hug, or talk to Karen. The Karen craze grew a little larger right there at that moment in that classroom. Principal Ritchie joined Jack by his side, and the two men smiled as they watched. That evening, as the sun finally drooped below the horizon, its farewell darkened the day. The air was still and warm. Honeysuckle was fragrant in the air. If Jack were alone, he'd be on the lemonade porch, sipping a sweet tea and wishing for change. He found it. Or it found him. The television was on in the corner, but on mute. Images of Jack and Karen were still plastered all over the local channels. He hoped he had made the right choice. Boris appeared in the living room window. "Let me in." Jack thought of the scene in Stephen King's Salem's Lot, when the fog surrounded the newborn vampire Danny, scratching the glass, begging his brother to let him in. It didn't end well for the brother who opened the window. Jack opened the front door and let Boris in. "Are we ready?" Boris asked. "There's so much to do." "I'll drive the escape to the clearing near the den," Jack said. "Karen will follow me and carry me back quickly." "I'll be here when you get back," Boris promised. "I think when this night is finally over," Jack stated, "we should stay at the clearing. I need some quiet tonight." He chuckled at the notion of the forest with the werewolf being more relaxing than a home with a bed and a television. Quiet wasn't exactly what was waiting for Jack and Karen at the clearing. Sasquatch lingered in the thick of the trees, out of sight from the human and the werewolf. The threat she had felt before melted away, if only minimally. Sasquatch was uncertain why a werewolf, who was a natural protector of humans, would be involved in such a massacre and deliberate disposal of its human victim. But now she wondered if there was more to the story than she could see or comprehend. And there was that smell the werewolf gave off. It drew Sasquatch to it. The need to get closer was growing more uncontrollable by the moment, especially after seeing her, with her blonde fur, coexisting with the human in the fire glow of the bonfire that crackled before them. The beast that was watching in silence was also growing more and more convinced that the werewolf was indeed her. Sasquatch took a step, and the great weight within her enormous foot brought the silence of the forest floor to a crackling scream as the dried fauna beneath it splintered apart and pulverized. It hadn't considered the sounds the bed of the forest made, as it was becoming too preoccupied with the notion that she may have found her werewolf. Werewolves were scarce, then extinct. No pack had been known to exist since the last great massacre nearly 3 decades ago. The last pack was destroyed except for 2 lost pups that were never accounted for. This werewolf in the clearing had to be her blonde pup. It stepped forward again and again. Before she knew it, the desperation in her motives became stronger than the actions to achieve her goal, to learn the truth. As it got closer, the smell of the werewolf became more pungent. It smelled good, familiar. It had to be her. Karen caught a glimpse of the beast walking toward them. The sight of it was monstrous and alarming. She threw herself before Jack and shielded him. Her claws were held out before her, spread and ready for the attack. She raised her muzzle, and her teeth bared for battle. Her ears and tail lay flat, and she hunched down, ready to pounce. The enormous and intimidating beast kept on, slowly approaching. Jack tried to step aside from behind Karen to get a better view. Karen spun around and swung her long arm at him, knocking him backward and sending him flying with great force. He landed hard behind the fallen tree. Karen faced Jack, snarled at him, and growled fiercely, warning him to stay put. Jack knew without mistake what her message to him was. He stayed there, hunkered down behind the fallen log, and waited. He had never seen Karen that vicious before, and he didn't care to see it again. It was different from the night she attacked Tyler and pursued him. This was primal and fierce, and instilled a raw fear within Jack. Sasquatch was now on the far side of the clearing. The human was out of sight. It knew where he was, hiding behind a downed tree. It could smell more clearly now. It was her. It was her werewolf. After all this time, they were reunited, and the giant heart beat within Sasquatch's chest. She smiled and took another step, but her werewolf still looked to be ready for war. Her werewolf did not recognize her after all this time. Karen could see it standing there, smiling as if delighted in the approaching attack. Her need to protect Jack raised with the fur on her back as it pointed straight up. It was still holding its course, taunting as it drew nearer. Karen could hear its heartbeat. The enormity of excitement pumping through the beating heart was alarming. She howled and charged forward, ready to combat this new threat. Sasquatch halted, realizing suddenly that Karen's body language spoke loudly that this was not a happy reunion. It realized as well that the werewolf that lunged toward her was in complete attack mode. It stopped and swiftly retreated back into the forest. This fight that would ensue would not end well, even if there were no casualties. The outcome would be bloodshed for the werewolf and possibly the human if he got in the way. Sasquatch sprinted as fast as its enormous legs could stride. Karen gave chase. She slowed for a brief moment when that familiar scent came back. She realized it was from the monster she was chasing. She had a memory, long forgotten, play against the canvas screen of her mind. She was sitting between 2 creatures she had seen in the clearing, the very beast she was planning on attacking. On the other side, another beast, exactly like the one she pursued now. There were 2 of them. A sense of family overcame her. The memory played on. The two beasts sat tall as pillars on either side of her when she was a small pup. They were on a rocky shoreline overlooking a great and vast lake, and a sense of calm was there, too, and no feeling of urgency of any kind. That was someone that knew her and her past, raised her. Family. Karen continued giving chase, only now for a completely different reason. She felt the urge, strong and uncontrollable, to reunite with this Sasquatch. Sasquatch was carried away on foot with the strides of a running god. Even a werewolf couldn't keep up. No living animal could. The elusive Sasquatch put great distance between them and was soon out of sight and smell of Karen. Karen's heart broke when she realized that she had lost a chance to reunite with someone who held answers from her past, forgotten days and nights that might be revelations of secrets that her dreams teased. Karen howled in defeat. With her tail tucked between her legs, she turned and slowly made her way back to Jack. At least now that she knew what had been stalking her in the woods, she felt at ease because the beast that eluded her was on her side, a protector.